Patch 8.2 is looming. An encrypted build just hit the PTR. Ian Hazzikostas just revealed a lot during interviews. We have quite a lot to get into. And while their actions have to live up to all of this, I'll say this much. Blizzard certainly are saying the right things. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the news. It has been a totally crazy week. Over in Warcraft land, we've had a bunch of excellent news, and over in the other channel, things have been absolutely wild. We've been getting like 2,000 new people a day. We had 9 videos go up last week on the other channel, so yeah, be sure to check out the next channel. And then finally, for this month's Patreon, it is mage themed. We've got some pretty cool art as well, if you like that sort of twisting nether outland vibe. This is our homage to that, so that is on the Patreon for this month, and with that covered, let's get into the news. Okay, the build. So an encrypted build of patch 8.2 has hit the public test realms. Now this means that they have a build that is up and ready to go, and I'm fairly sure this means that PTR is going to go live this coming Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. It's about damn time, and I have an upcoming video that actually lays out the rather wacky situation with BfA's pacing, but overall, this is very good news. So with that said, let's talk about all the new information that Ian has shared about the future of the game. Okay, Flight. So Flight was not available in Argus. That did tick off many people, although it is very true that Flight actually breaks the scene composition there. Trust me, if you get a free camera and you get it working in Argus and you fly about the place, it's totally wild, it all breaks. But simply, the zone is built using the sort of paper cutout technique of the vanilla zones in a way, and that essentially means that it's all designed from a grounded perspective. If you actually move up in the vertical axis, the whole thing breaks really quickly. Well, the good news is that Mechagon and Nazjatar are nothing like that. They are both zones that will fully support flying once the patch drops, so if that's something that you dislike from Argus, then rest easy, you will be able to fly in the new zones. Flying, from what I understand, is still going to be a relatively quick unlock in patch 8.2, so it's probably worth just getting Battle for Azeroth Pathfinder through now. Okay, let's talk about the world content stuff that Ian revealed in the PC Gamer and Polygon interviews. So, of the two zones, Mechagon is the smaller one. It is about, I think a little bit smaller than Timeless Isles. Nazjatar is, of course, a bit bigger. Ian said that they do not want these zones to feel like the regular formula just applied to a new set of terrain and creatures, which is very good to hear. They want them both to feel like a different gameplay experience and feel a bit new, so it should just feel different from the regular gameplay of Kulturas and Zandalar. Now, given how Kulturas and Zandalar combine regular world quests and the incursions, well, I suppose I'm left thinking that these two new zones are probably not massively world quest focused, or at least have a little bit more in terms of content diversity. Certainly that's what I'd love to see for the zone. Now, as for the mechanics of these two new zones, well, he somewhat hinted at what we can expect. So Ian said the Nazjatar is going to be the more traditional of the two in its styling, and that Mechagon is, quote, what you might expect from a gnomish paradise. According to the Polygon interviewer, it is set to be more sandboxy and unpredictable and a bit wacky. Really, it seems to me a bit closer to the Timeless Isle in terms of its design, which certainly would be a good thing. I mean, the Timeless Isle is kind of amazing. It really did not have that much content, yet it seems to have resulted in a crazy amount of gameplay and playtime that everybody seemed to be okay with at the time. I suspect that it's just something about the pace of that zone really working for players, and that the progression of the Timeless Coins ended up feeling pretty good on new characters when combined with all the buff shrines. And of course, it was late in the game for the Mists of Pandaria expansion, which is also the time that loads of people will have had the powerful experience potions saved up from that NPC outside the Great Wall, which of course is no longer in the game, and therefore probably had loads of characters to grind up with the Timeless Isle gear. And really, Blizzard haven't had much of a chance to do something as playful as Mechagon in a while, so it really could be a near-perfect place for sandbox-like mechanics, and hopefully it will serve as a bit of a testbed for future types of content. Ian did say that both of the zones will have progression and I think reputations onto themselves, which does make Mechagon actually a bit more beefy than I expected. To be honest, I thought Mechagon would just be another set of world quests and the real content would be in Nazjatar, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. As for Nazjatar, it's hard to know. They said that it's not going to feel like Kulturas and Zandalar, but still will be a bit more traditional. I'm wondering if that just means we unlock stuff over time. Ian did say they were looking to implement the best of their past outdoor zones, so hopefully that will all come together to make something that feels a bit new. I'm a little bit skeptical. I really do want to see changes to the formula, but of course I'm open to being surprised in that one. And then I think the final concern that I would flag up about all of this that we have not seen Ian cover in any of the interviews, or really just haven't seen the team properly talk about that much, that is the content gating. I think when the content is spread out a lot, it just ruins the pacing of the content, and I'd be kind of worried that the team would still be tempted to do that. Okay, next up, the alliance split. We are going to talk about his narrative thoughts in terms of design philosophy, but Ian kind of gave us a bit of a scoop because he said this: alliance players don't have a split in their ranks just yet. Yeah, just yet. So what, are the alliance going to have a civil war soon? Some sort of division that's going to warrant alliance players making a choice? I don't know, like I could see maybe Tyrande going a bit more loopy in her lust for vengeance, perhaps going against Alliance principles, maybe Gen could join her, that would lead to a large problem for Anduin and would kick off some drama. Ultimately, Tyrande and Gen have already went rogue on Anduin once with Darkshore, so that's something that he can't be thrilled about and probably will have to, well, kind of crack down on to maintain power at some point. So I'd say that could be the seeds of an Alliance division plotline. So with that spicy scoop, let's talk about his general thoughts on narrative. Ian said that the B plot is going to be taking the fore here, and that absolutely is what I want to see. I think that while parts of the faction war narrative have been fine, I think others have just been bad, and across the board I think they failed to create a narrative that translates well into the player experience, with most of us being, well, just with us being the most passive of protagonists. Ian said that there have been a lot of strong opinions because of people's strong connections to those characters, especially with the Horde, and that the team are happy with Saurfang and Sylvanas, Dazar'alor, and the Jaina arc. And I do think they're broadly right, those are the things that have worked, but bar the battle for Dazar'alor, I think there are stories that don't play well into the player's actual character fantasy, and therefore I think they're satisfying for Blizzard as creators and for the discourse online, but I don't think they've turned into a well-designed narrative game. I think the best examples of World of Warcraft storytelling are things like the establishment of the Argent Vanguard or Foothold in Icecrown. That was a set of quests where the player was definitely just a part of an army, but they were important in that, and they kind of felt like they were part of the broader world because of all of that. Felt like you were contributing to it, living in it, having a bit of an impact. I really think that's the core of MMO storytelling when it goes right, and I think that's something that Blizzard have to do a lot more than just focus on having a few cinematics that people will cry at for YouTube videos. Indeed, they talked about their goal with storytelling being the evocation of emotion, and I actually massively disagree with that on MMO storytelling. I think the core of that is to elevate the player's own fantasy, meaning that your job as a storyteller within an MMORPG creating context is to provide the backdrop and the narrative content that is a vehicle for the player's fantasy. I would say more often through the exploration and advancement of the world as spearheaded by your character, and really less through Blizzard's own characters. And I think this is probably an unpopular opinion when I say it now, and I really just think it's the sort of thing that plays better. I think it is a bit of a you have to play it to believe it sort of thing. I really do think this is the main area where World of Warcraft storytelling has fallen over. I may love a Blizzard cinematic, I might love doing a breakdown of it, but I don't think it's amazing storytelling in the context of an MMORPG. Indeed, I would say that most of their in-game cinematics, as great as they've been, as emotional rally points for the community, I don't think they've been that useful for the actual player fantasy element of storytelling. Then finally, Ian touched on the choice-based narrative stuff, saying that it's mostly the Horde right now because that just fits the current story that they've got, and they don't want to just cram the Alliance full of choices purely for the sake of it, which I absolutely do agree with. The reaffirmation of the choices mattering in these interviews was interesting because we haven't seen any of those choices actually pay off yet, so it's going to be just I guess it'll be interesting to see how these choices actually play out as the expansion unfolds, and if Blizzard will really put consequences in, especially like for those, do you side with Sylvanas or not choices that the Horde have quite recently got. Okay, with that covered, let's talk about the Heart of Azeroth. Ian was pretty frank. He said there was a lot of negative feedback and that the re-earning trait situation is something that they, quote, completely want to move away from. They are still going to make new Azerite traits, they just won't be tied to Heart of Azeroth level. Well, their unlock requirements won't increase from basically the current ones that we have today, and that means that eventually a few world quests would have a new character sorted out with them. So instead, the Heart of Azeroth itself will have its own traits. Now here's the great thing. Ian said that this is going to mean both active and passive traits. Yeah, so he said that there will be new things for us to keybind, that they will impact our rotations very much like the actives from the Legion artifact system. And basically this does confirm new abilities for every class in the game, And that is just wonderful to hear. Ultimately, Azerite traits did not fill the void left by artifacts, legendaries, and tier sets, and I mean, this could really go a long way to getting us back in a Legion-like place in terms of how our classes feel to play. Ian then talked about how they quickly knew that the Heart of Azeroth was a large problem on launch. He said that 8.1 was too soon to implement a real fix, and that 8.2 is their first chance to properly address the feedback through design. Importantly, he did acknowledge how this came to be. He said that the Heart of Azeroth was designed to counter the problems of artifacts being front-loaded. Basically, the designer's thought was that not making choices wasn't that interesting after you got the initial post-launch progression of your artifact, and that they essentially thought that was a missed opportunity. Azerite gear was meant to provide you with that steady stream of choices at endgame. Now, that all sounded great in paper to them, but obviously it did not work out that well. And what I would say is that I think this arose because they thought about it as a design problem first, and they did not think about designing the player experience first. I think that really explains a lot of their decision making. Many problems would be sidestepped if they were always thinking about the player experience first and less about their grander design plans. As WoW, I think, constantly shows us, their grand design plans and systems that are meant to solve problems often do so in a way that does not mesh with the player experience, and I think the Heart of Azeroth is yet another example of that. Now, this interview actually does get better. Ian said this about the design process: "A big failing in the way we approached designing Battle for Azeroth and testing it was we waited too long in the process to get the Azerite armor and Azerite traits fully stood up in the beta. We missed some important data there that would have been essential to catch this earlier, that might have led to us making improvements before the system was live." With anything like that we do going forward, it's going to be an even higher priority for us to get those into players' hands from some point of the earliest stages in our alpha tests and early beta rather than further along the line. And you know what, that's fantastic to hear. They really seem to have learned this lesson the hard way, but I'm glad they've learned it. I mean, I'm still surprised they've made so many mistakes. I've heard they can be a bit isolated over at Blizzard from the player experience, and a lot of their designs certainly do suggest they're in a bit of a bubble over there. So if they can't trust themselves to intuit the player response, and I don't think they can at this stage, then yeah, a more robust beta plan absolutely is the correct path forward. Next up, progression. So we've already talked about the class stuff here, but Ian did say that the team is looking at ways for characters to improve meaningfully and permanently at endgame, and that Nazjatar and Mechagon will be two new areas for the team to try rewards that are not tied to the core gameplay loops for each class. And really, this was fantastic for me to hear. Class progression and gear progression, I think, are aspects of RPG character development that have been stretched thin, and I think other aspects of RPG character development have just not really been touched. We will, of course, have to wait and see what this means, but I think it fundamentally is a good thing to hear. Next up, design philosophy. And I think this is the really important stuff here. Ian said that they have learned lessons on the importance of player agency and what types of progression do and do not feel good, and temporary versus permanent rewards. My big hope here is that they understand that keeping up with a power curve is not satisfying progression, because it always feels like you're chasing an arbitrary game system and not carving your own path forward and progressing your own character. Again, it's that thing I mentioned earlier of designing the game from a player experience first perspective instead of designing it from a almost purely problem-solving, strategic sort of level, which seems to be what they do. Blizzard love their grand strategies, like the AP curve, the, technically infinite character progression, but they end up implementing things that are not emotionally resonant with players. They don't really provide people with the emotional hit that you normally would get for progressing an RPG character. I think if Blizzard truly understand the difference here and embrace it moving forward, I could see myself playing more World of Warcraft for sure. Now, he went on to talk about the team and how in the past they felt burnt by the addition of systems and just the burden of those layered systems being in the game for a very long time. And that's very apparent with their design decisions, like artifacts and legendaries being disposable. And I think what they found out here is that once removed, that type of design feels quite bad indeed, especially because it somewhat shatters the glass for the next time they ask you to go through that system again. Having just lost artifacts, I think the Heart of Azeroth feels less exciting because you know you're going to lose it anyway, and that always is the case, but I just think it feels worse in the way that they've ended up implementing things with the external character progression. It's not like getting a new tier of talents where it's like, yep, I've got my new talent, that's now a part of my class. So essentially it is just him saying that, yeah, you know, not having those sort of longer term permanent things, they're beginning to feel the downsides of that. Even going away from class design, imagine if the order halls were maintained, and maybe even designed in the first place, so that they were something that could have stayed relevant for years. That could have been a really nice rallying point for players over time. Anyway, in light of all of those problems, Ian did say this, that it doesn't mean that players don't still want cool new things to increase their characters' level as they go into new worlds and enter new expansions. He said, "We need to be more willing than we have been in the last couple of years and expansions to make permanent additions to the game and accept that yes, there will be some untidiness down the road, but it'll be worth it because it's exciting for players." And I think this is so important. People want that out of an MMO, right? In an RPG, you're adventuring, and you're supposed to be progressing and gaining new things. And this is exactly what I would want to hear from them. I've been harping on about the designers feeling very defensive and problem-solving oriented for quite a while now. It seems like the problem is that they've been making fear-based decisions in the design of their game. But here's the thing, if you make fear-based decisions, then you end up being defined by your weaknesses, not by your strengths. And I think that is an extremely important principle, both in life and also in game design, and it's likely one of the core missteps that Blizzard have made over the last while. Now, while you could bring up things like Mythic Plus as an example that somewhat goes against the statement that he made, because that was a major system, I think it's pretty clear that Ian is talking about things like the class design and player progression more than the content systems. So yeah, the core of that stuff has all been defined by their fears over the last while. It seems like they've perhaps noticed that. They've maybe noticed it's been leading to them making poor decisions. And it's great to see that they know that. We will have to see what they actually do with the next expansion, but the fact that some of these philosophies are beginning to shift and change is an extremely good thing to hear. Oh yeah, also Ian talked about portals, but he didn't really say anything new in the PC Gamer interview, I believe. I really wish he would just talk about, you know, people not having reasons to go out into the world, and that's why the world feels small. And if you haven't watched the most recent video on the channel, I know there was a heated response to that, which I actually really do appreciate. But towards the end of that, there was a point about a way to make Azeroth itself a lot more fun. So even if you're not interested in the leveling squish, I think you'd probably enjoy hearing what that kind of system could be. I think it's something that, well, yeah, ties into the portal criticisms, I suppose, in a way that might be quite productive. But yeah, there we have it. A bunch of fantastic interviews with Ian in which he accurately pointed out the team's battle for Azeroth missteps, and I think far more importantly, talked about the deeper reasons behind those missteps. While this is by no means a guarantee that the next patch is going to be amazing, it does show that the team are becoming quite aware of their predicament. So, because of this, I remain hopeful for patch 8.2, and I am really glad that I, for all intents and purposes, stopped playing World of Warcraft over the last few months. I've not forced myself to play a game that has been in a state that I have not enjoyed. And that's great, because it means that if 8.2 is good, as I actually think it will be, I'm in the position to come back to WoW with fresh eyes and renewed interest, not being bogged down with the baggage of having forced myself through a version of it that I didn't really enjoy. So because of that, I'm actually quite excited for the future. But there you go, that's it for this video. If you like, mages and space, you can check out this month's Patreon physical tier. Past that, there's so much going on with the new channel, the Variety Gaming channel, and believe me, we've got massive plans for that going forward, so be sure to check it out. And yeah, you know what, with that said, I think that's just about all that I have. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.